All right, thank you so much. Welcome to another episode of the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast. My name is Fred Diamond. Of course, I'm the author of Love, Hope, Lyme, what family members, partners, and friends who love a chronic Lyme survivor need to know. Meghan and Johanne, the book is available, of course, on Amazon, and it's free. I've been giving out the free version, the PDF, to chronic Lyme survivors from day one. Meghan, we've given out close to 3,000 copies of Love, Hope, Lyme. Just reach out to me on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, either one, and we'll definitely make sure that you get a copy of Love, Hope, Lyme. If you're watching this today on YouTube, thank you so much. Give us a thumbs up, ask a question, give a comment. We'll definitely get in touch with you if you're listening to the show on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much. Go up, give us a 5-star review, subscribe. We would greatly appreciate that as well. Just want to remind people that this podcast does not promote any specific medical treatment and should not be seen as a replacement for medical advice. If you have some medical concerns, please go see a medical professional. So I'm excited. We're doing today's recording in January of 2025, and we have Meghan Bradshaw from the Center for Lyme Action, and we have Johanne, who's also a volunteer with the Center for Lyme Action and does actually something specific, which we're going to get to in a second. Meghan, we had Bonnie Crater on the show in a previous episode. Center for Lyme Action, the virtual fly-in. So much work needs to be done to get federal funding for Lyme disease. As a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago, we did a show with Dr. Angel Davey, who spoke about a lot of the work that's happening in the Department of Defense and how they're using funding to do tick-borne disease research and to provide care and assistance, not just for military personnel, but for their families as well. You know, she mentioned that over I think 2006 to 2022, I think it was, close to 7,000 military professionals, service professionals were taken down with Lyme disease, and 63,000 of their family and beneficiaries also had tick-borne disease as well. So I'm glad that you're here, Meghan. I'm glad that you're here, Johanne. So Meghan, tell us about Center for Lyme Action. Tell us about the virtual fly-in. Tell us what people need to know. And by the way, I'm also going to ask you both for your Lyme story after we get some of the details out of there so that we can make sure that people know about the fly-in and what Center for Lyme Action does.
Sounds great. Well, thanks so much for having us, Fred. We really appreciate it. And we're excited to be here to talk some more about this exciting upcoming event. So my name is Meghan Bradshaw, and I was a tick-borne illness patient myself. My story in a nutshell is that I was misdiagnosed and had a lot of complications. And a tick bite turned me into bionic woman. So I've had 9 joints replaced and 8 surgically fused all before I turned 30. So I've had a lot of orthopedic surgeries to clean up the damage. And during this time, I really got involved in patient advocacy work, which then prompted me to return to school. Earlier this year, I completed my master's in public health at UNC Chapel Hill, and I was really excited to be able to do that program to kind of figure out what tools and methods we could really use to help enact real change for our patient community. And so I'm really honored now to have the opportunity to work for the Center for Lyme Action full time. So I'm our government relations manager. And so I help to coordinate our advocates and grow our advocacy network, and also work on our federal affairs. So I work with our partners in the federal government so that we can organize our community and help to increase this funding. And so I'm really excited to talk about our big event, which is really, it's the magic. It's how we've been able to have incredible success over the last few years and see substantial growth in federal funding for Lyme and tick-borne diseases. Obviously, we know this is something that has been historically underfunded and mismanaged. And so we're really grateful that we have some leaders at the federal government now who understand what a challenge this is and how much work we have to do to get some better outcomes for patients, for the folks who are living with us today, and also just better prevent tick-borne diseases and detect them so we can respond to them quickly and effectively. And so what we're doing is helping to enable that to happen. So we host this event in February every year, and it's called a fly-in, and it's essentially a virtual advocacy day. And so I like to emphasize a couple of things about this event. Is number one is you do not have to be a professional. You do not have to have any prior experience being an advocate. You do not have to be a lobbyist. This is a place for patients, for their family members, for healthcare providers, researchers, and other supporters to come and join meetings that we set everything up, and it's all hosted via Zoom. So you can participate wherever you're at. If you have to step out of work for a bit to join the meeting, if you are stuck at home, if you are in the middle of treatment and able to join us on Zoom from your couch. I mean, when I started, I was laid up and tied to an IV pole. And so I really like to emphasize that this is a way for anybody to participate wherever you're at in your journey, and you don't have to have any experience. And so this event is going to be held on February 18th and 19th. And we have a few different trainings that happen a week ahead. And so Tuesday, February 18th, we have what we call our opening session. And that's where we get some remarks from members of Congress. And we recognize some of these members of Congress who are our Lyme champions. And so we thank them for their commitment to this issue and helping to advocate on our behalf in Congress. And this goes on in the afternoon. And so this will be hosted from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern time on February 18th. And then the following day on February 19th, we set meetings up, and advocates can expect to participate in at least 3 meetings. And these meetings are usually going to take about 15 to 30 minutes apiece. And you'll sign on to Zoom, and you may meet with your member of Congress themselves if they're able to join, or it may be one of their staff members, usually somebody who focuses on their health issues. And so we will sign on and we'll give them a little bit of background, and we're going to allow our advocates the opportunity to share a brief synopsis of how tick-borne diseases have impacted their lives, because it's really important for members and staffers to have some context about how these issues are impacting the people in their communities. And so advocates they'll share a brief story, and maybe a few members on the call will have the opportunity to share. And if you don't have the opportunity to share in a meeting, that's okay. You can always follow up and send something in writing that's also really impactful once they've had the chance to meet you.
Yeah, so I actually participated in 2024.
Yeah.
I live in Virginia. I live in Northern Virginia, and calls were set up with our 2 senators, their offices, and there were staffers, and they were very attentive, and they paid attention, and they were great advocates. I want you to introduce Joanna and tell us
Yeah.
what her role is going to be, and
Yeah.
then I also want to ask you after that about where we are with funding for Lyme disease to give people a little bit of context on why
Sure.
this is so important.
Sure. So Joanne is one of our fantastic advocates who's from California, and she actually joined for the first time last year. So I thought it'd be great to have her here to share a little bit of what it was like as a first timer, as somebody who's a patient herself. And Joanne actually really stepped up and helped us a ton with a big part of our process, which is appropriations forms. So the way that I like to say it is that we have these meetings with the members of Congress and their staff members to provide context. And that kind of tees up before we send them these forms, which is a formal request for the funding that we're asking for. And so we usually have to send 1 form per request, and we have usually 5 to 6 requests every year. So think about 5 to 6 forms that we have to send to every office that we meet with. So this adds up pretty quickly, and we usually have well over 1,000 forms that we have to complete in somewhat of a narrow window. It's usually within a few weeks or months following the event, because there are deadlines so that it can be a part of the appropriations process. And so Joanne was a huge help for us last year, and I will turn it over to her so she can share a little bit about her story as a patient and how she came to join the Center for Lyme Action, and what participation looked like for her as a first timer, and then someone who was supporting the appropriations forms process.
Okay, thank you, Megan. Thank you, Fred, for having us here. I really appreciate being able to be here. As Megan said, last year was my very first time, and I'm not great with technology, and it took 24 years for them to figure out that I had Lyme. And by the time I had Lyme, I was falling down. I couldn't use my arms and legs very much. A large part for me was neurological. So I had a lot of jerking. I became schizophrenic, paranoid, delusional. I was wearing 3 jackets and hiding by dumpsters for my psychiatrist to come, my psychologist to go out there and find me to drag me back in. So in my situation, because I went through all that paranoia and schizophrenia, the idea of even stepping out and getting involved at all was absolutely terrifying. But I felt very strongly that after all this, it was so infuriating to me that Lyme disease can be preventable if people know about it. And not knowing is, I think, one of the biggest problems. And when I found out about the Center for Lyme Action, the idea that I could be out there and let people know I'm here and get the word out to a lot of people. I was literally going to parks with big bags of information and handing them out to strangers who thought I was crazy. I looked like a bag lady. So I figured this would be easy. And then to find out this is literally the only organization I've ever done Zoom calls with. So the whole technology thing, even today, was a little unnerving. But they walk you through it, and they gave me a summary packet so I could really look at everything before getting on there. I think it's important to show a face. So the fly-in that Meghan was saying, and I'm not somebody to step out of my comfort zone there, but I went out there and just to show my face, and I got all excited that they cared, that they were listening. And I had to tell people, especially, I think it's important, people look at me and they don't think I'm sick. And it's important for people to understand it's still in there. I'm still treating. It's been almost 9 years. I'm still treating. But on the flip side, one of the reasons that I also like doing the forums and being involved with this is one of my big treatment things that's helping me physically is I've taken up ballroom dancing. And I'm obsessed with it. And I'm now retired, and so I'm with my grandkids and I'm dancing and all that. And I didn't want to interrupt that, especially since I'm still treating, so I have good days and bad days. But with the Center for Lyme Action, the Zoom calls, it was so wonderful to be on those calls and see all those different faces. Lyme and all those tick-borne illnesses look so different on everybody. And we need to let people see that. And that's huge. And the forum part of it, which was nice, as I said, they do a lot of training, and I had great summary packets. I found that as I'm doing the forms, it's a cut and paste. You get used to what the forms look like. It's the few first of them are terrifying. I must have emailed Meghan a million times, but I got quick answers so I could use them. And as the more I did, the faster they went. But in the same time, because they were forms, I could still go to all my dance lessons and do all my dance stuff, and I could still be with my grandchildren. And frankly, if I had a bad day, I just missed a day, and it was not a big deal. And the idea that I could be impactful and make such a huge difference to this amazing organization is huge. I don't want my grandkids or anybody else, strangers or not strangers, to ever go through this. So that's
Yeah.
my story.
Yeah, Joanna, first of all, a couple great things. One is thanks for sharing that. Second of all, for people who are listening, you're wearing a scarf that the Center for Lyme Action
Yeah.
distributes to people who are on the Zoom calls. And you just made a couple good points. One is uh, our elected officials and their staffs need to see
Mhm.
people for anything, right? Everything that they act upon, they don't know about it until they see real world people talking about it. Most things come across as documents, right? And we talked about the forms, the appropriation forms that need to fill out. There are processes that have to happen because they are spending our money, taxpayers' dollars, and there's so many competing things for dollars. But when Congress and their staff sees human beings that are impacted by and not just Lyme disease, but anything, that then brings it home. They see a human being, they can tie it back, they can hear your story, and it's remarkable. So first of all, good for you, and good for you for getting past your fear of of being on Zoom and speaking. And it wasn't hard, right? You're just
No,
talking to other human beings, and
right.
you're talking about something that has impacted you, right?
Mhm.
It's impacted your life. It's changed your life in so many ways.
Mhm.
And it's good for us to let people know. Meghan, give us a little bit of a perspective. There are some diseases that get funded in the billions, in the tens of billions, right? Because they've been actively acted upon, if you will, for decades. Cancer, leukemia, heart disease, et cetera. There's been advocacy for decades, scores, and they get funding in the billions, tens of billions. Lyme is relatively new to the game, so give us a perspective on why it's so important for Congress, elected officials, to know about the challenges that human beings, chronic Lyme survivors, face, so that the appropriate amount of dollars can be continue to grow.
Yeah. So, as we've mentioned, this has been something that has been historically underfunded. And so in recent years, we had looked into this, and on average, the per patient funding for Lyme disease research at NIH was about around $107 per patient, which is substantially lower than some of the other vector-borne diseases that are much less common in the United States, like West Nile and malaria. We're maybe seeing about 2,000 cases of each of those a year, and they're getting between $70,000 to $108,000 per patient average. And so this is a huge discrepancy. And so our advocacy is working because we're starting to see significant gains in funding for tick-borne diseases in the United States over the last few years. So the Center for Lyme Action is a fairly young organization, and I don't want to get too much into our background, because for anybody who's listened to Bonnie's podcast, or if they haven't, they can go listen to that and hear a little bit of how the organization came to be. But we're about 5 years old, and we have really been able to harness the power of the federal government through patient advocacy, through this grassroots advocacy movement. We have advocates from 47 states that join us now, and they meet with their representatives each year. We have been able to triple federal funding over the last 5 years since the organization has started, which is incredible, because that's a significant gain, just generally speaking. But also, this is a time where we're seeing a lot of cuts across the board for other health programs. And so we're kind of going against the grain here, which is really remarkable. And it's a testament that patient advocacy and advocacy from supporters is really making a difference. And so these conversations that we have each year when we meet with these staffers, sometimes now it feels like it's an annual check-in with them. We're developing relationships. They're getting to know their constituents, because these are advocates who have tick-borne diseases who are showing up year after year, and they're sharing the updates of how this is influencing, their everyday life and what kind of challenges they're experiencing. And these staffers are really starting to understand just the gravity of the issue, and they're advocating for us. And so these relationships are really essential. And I've heard from countless advocates too, who feel like they now start to have personal relationships with the offices that work to, on their behalf. And so it's really amazing, because we're really seeing that this effort it's a recipe for success.
So again, I'm in Virginia, and Johanna's in California. Do you need representation across the country? One thing that we talk a lot about, of course, in the Love Hope Lyme podcast is Lyme is not just in New England, it's all over the country, it's all over the world. I've interviewed people for the podcast in Poland, Australia, Ireland, all across Europe, et cetera, all across the United States and Canada as well. So do you have fly-in people participating for all 50 states, or tell us, do you have any needs that we need to address for that?
Sure do have some needs. So as I mentioned, we've historically had 47 states represented. So there are a few states that I like to say are just kind of low turnout. So even if maybe we've had one advocate from that state every year, we know that it's a fragile area, because if that person maybe has an unexpected health emergency and they're unable to join the meetings that day, or they have a scheduling conflict, we may not have somebody from that state. And so while we have some key areas that we really need to focus on, we just need more advocates across the board. But one thing that we're really trying to aim for this year is having all 50 states represented. We're also really trying to locate some advocates that are in districts that we have not historically had anybody. And so what that means is when we're able to secure an advocate from a district that's new representation that we have, we're able to request a meeting with an office that maybe we've never met with before. So this is an opportunity for us to get more support from a new congressional office. And so I have a list that I'm mapping out currently, and I will, if there's anybody who's curious and wants to learn more about areas, I can certainly share that so that we can strive to fill in some of those gaps. But again, it's, this is a big year. We're trying to have, a record number of increases again this year in the appropriations process. And this is what we focus on at the fly-in. Additionally, we're also working on some new legislation, some authorization bills that I can't really speak too much to right now, but these are going to be potentially just incredibly helpful for our patient community, going to be the things that help us get the outcomes that we really need. And so more than ever, we really want to see this community come together. And we're really trying to operate as a coalition here. We're working on behalf of all tick-borne disease patients, past, present, and future. And we have a lot of great support from a number of different organizations in our community, but we want to invite everybody in. And so we hope that we'll see that we'll have more support from maybe smaller community organizations that hadn't heard about us yet, or some other Lyme and tick-borne disease organizations that maybe haven't participated. But this is something that is truly going to make a difference for all of us. And so we really want to bring everyone together to work on this issue because it's really going to help to maximize our impact.
So Joanna, you had the opportunity to speak when you were on Zoom last year, correct?
Yes.
So what would be your advice if someone is one of the advocates on the virtual fly-in day and, they're part of the Zoom with, maybe a dozen other advocates, Lyme survivors or family members? Again, I don't have Lyme disease, but I'm so committed to, finding treatment and advocacy and care, et cetera. So there are a lot of people also who, I don't know about a lot, but there are also caregivers and other people who are committed. What would be your advice, Joanna, if somebody has the opportunity to be on the call and then has the opportunity to speak for a minute? What do you think would be some of the most impactful things that they would want to get across to influence the congressional staffer or congressional member that is also listening to this?
I think the number one thing is to understand that Lyme looks so different on everybody. And so never to hold back, because as I said, in my situation, it's odd. Until I start jerking and slurring and having a Bell's palsy day or something, people think I'm completely fine. And somebody else that has something that's very visible, they might be a little embarrassed. Like when I have Bell's palsy and I'm slurring, I look very different than I do right now. All of those faces are things that people need to see. They need to get that opportunity. And that little tiny time on those Zoom calls is not very long. Just being able to show that is, I think, very impactful.
Good. And a final recommendation from you, what would you tell if somebody is on the fence, they're a little bit nervous? What might be your advice for them, Joanna?
Well, first of all, I would say, even if you don't want to say anything, you can just be on that Zoom call and learn and feel like you're a part of it. You're still going to make an impact. And with what I said before about the forums, which is so nice, is that that's something you can do in your own home on your flexible time. It's not going to interfere with your treatments and the good things you can do and the things that aren't so great. But it's a way. I know the most frustrating thing for me was feeling like I just couldn't get the word out enough. All my neighbors have heard. I had told Meghan early on, I think God gave me this because he knows I have a big mouth and I'll share. And until we share, we have to get that acknowledgement out there. So if doctors, I wasted so much time going to doctors that said there's no such thing as Lyme in California. And if it was just well known, I tell people, as terrifying as all this is, people don't stop going to the beach just because they have to wear sunscreen. And it's the same mentality, but we can't help ourselves if we don't know about it.
Yeah. Once again, I want to acknowledge you and thank you for being on the podcast and for telling your story and for the work that you're doing and, for the, uh, for your advocacy and I agree with you 100%. It's like it's a disease that people need to know about, and there's not a lot that is known about it. Even today, again, we're doing today's interview at the end of 2024, and the show's going live in 2025. There's still so many mysteries about Lyme disease. People
Mhm.
do want to know, though, once they have someone in their life, right? I've spoken to so many people who have like a sister-in-law, or they have like a niece or a child, God forbid. And, then they need to learn more and they realize all the challenges that it provides. So I just want to acknowledge you for getting past some of the fears that you said you had and going on and telling people what they need to know. Megan Bradshaw, again, thank you so much. Center for Lyme Action has done so many great things and continuing to grow. Go listen to my podcast with Bonnie Crater from last year, and she gives a little bit of the history. It's a remarkable history. Megan, are there any final thoughts, anything that you want to get across that we haven't addressed yet?
Yeah, I something I like to share is that I got involved with patient advocacy when I was in the throes of it, and I was going through pretty much a major surgery every 3 months, and I felt like I had very little power and control over what was happening with um, my medical care at that point, and it was just really daunting. And one of the things that I've really found is that getting involved with patient advocacy and sharing my story, and using that to help prevent other people from having to experience some of the challenges that we've experienced has been really healing for me. And I have this conversation a lot with other advocates who have found that it's also been healing for them. And so, for anybody who's maybe on the fence or apprehensive, it takes a lot of courage, and it is really bold to be able to come on a meeting and talk with your member of Congress or their staffers. It can be really intimidating to talk about, anything, but especially maybe the worst thing that you ever been through, something that's so deeply personal. But Brene Brown talks about how vulnerability is our single greatest measure of courage. And I think that that's a really amazing point and something to consider as patients are willing to share their stories, and share about these challenges, these things that have so deeply impacted their lives, and helping to make it so that someone else doesn't have to experience that too. I just hope that other patients will get to experience some of that healing that I know I felt, and I know Joanne has also felt in our advocacy work. It helps to just reclaim a little bit of what's been taken from us. So I hope that we'll be able to welcome some new advocates this year. Please visit centerforlymeaction.org. You can sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on events and calls to action. And we hope that we'll see you at our fly-in in February.
All right, that's very well said. And once again, just to wrap up, it's a very good use of time. It's something that needs to happen, and I'm grateful for you both for being on today's Love Hope Light podcast. My name is Fred Diamond.